Hey everyone, I wanted to do something different this week, so I decided to not only do the solo episode on podcast, but also record a video because this is a really important topic to me. It's called defining your target. Really knowing what your target audience is crucial to brand strategy, but there's a lot of confusion when it comes to defining what is it. Is it your audience? Is it a consumer, a customer? There's a lot of like different words used. So I wanted to dive in and take some more like debunk some of the stuff, but also give you some insights as to how I actually do this. So let's just dive into it. So as you can see, we have all these different words: audience, customer, consumer, tribe, community, fam. And some of them are more used in like an actual context of marketing. Like if you say, hey fam, what's up? That's of course really more of a talking to your audience. While as some of them are used more as words in the process of doing brand strategy, defining your target customer, consumer, your audience, your target audience. There's a lot of words that are used. So let's take a look at some of them and make sure we understand what they mean. So the audience, I think, is a word that especially got a lot bigger once we started talking about this whole online space where there's a lot of brands that are almost acting like they are media channels. For example, Let's Talk Branding is, of course, I do have an audience because it's a podcast, it's a media blog. But on the other hand, I also sell courses. So I need people to buy those and are not just there for fun. So I think that's an important distinction to make here. An audience is somewhat of an assumption that's made that people are actually listening, watching your brand, looking at it. And I think that's fine if you have that. But in a lot of cases, audience is a bit conflicting to me because it does suppose that people are listening, while in reality it's probably a lot more like there's this you're on a highway and you're flashing by and your own life passes through your brain and you're like you have all these thoughts, and brands are maybe just like, I don't know, let's say 5% of what's happening. So I think just this is a much more closer view to reality than having an audience is, because having an audience is awesome if you can achieve that, but getting there is often a lot harder. So we need to think about ways to convince our client that it's not that easy, and maybe not using the word audience would be a good starting point here. So another word is consumer. I think consumer on the one hand has like a bit of a negative tone to it because we don't like the fact that we consume things. It makes humans almost like be only this thing, these craving animals. And I think that's why we kind of have some issues with it. But on the other hand, what's really interesting to me, consuming is really the same as using. It's not just about buying the product, it's the one that will actually use it. And oftentimes these are not the same. So the customer is the buyer. He's the one that's actually giving you the money for the product. And most of the time, the customer is the consumer, but not always. So think about that. It's really important. There's distinctions there. When you, I don't know, let's say you're a mom and you're buying stuff for your kids, these products need to work for their consumer, being the kids, cookies or whatever, but they also need to somehow make sure that the mom buys them. That's their customer. So I think in general, I would avoid words like consumer, customer, audience, and think about who these people actually are. People that love to, people that hate to, people that don't, or like start with these sentences and try to fill them in. I think you'll be a lot more like happy with the words you're using than actually using these other words. Of course, it really depends on the context. If I tell my client like we've done some research on people that will probably use this product, what their expectations are, what their needs are, what their values are, whatever. That's consumer research, and that's fine to use that word. But whenever you can, try to make it more human, try to make it more like what do they need, what's their context, try to think about these things. Another big word here is not like it's target audience, customer, whatever, but the word target itself is also a very loaded word because targeting for a lot of people is negative, and it's I think in general a bit of an issue that comes from, if you look at the world of branding, it's a lot more like there's a lot more attempts to make it human, attracting people, speaking to them, making it relevant, resonate. And on the other hand, there's a lot of marketing speak, which is targeting, marketing, making sure like you reach them on the, and this is like these two worlds are a bit different, and I think targeting comes from that world of marketing a little bit more. But for me, it's a word that does work because it does show what we need to do as a brand. We need to first understand who this person that will buy our brand is, and then we need to actively go and reach them by targeting them. And I think sometimes when it's we use these words like resonate and attract, those are great, but sometimes it's a bit like, again, this idea of we're gonna have attract this audience, we're gonna be the best band and people just gonna come to us when, and the stadium will be full of people. And I think, again, like targeting is a more active word, and if you leave like the negative connotations out of it, I think it's a good way to explain to your client what this is about, that we first need to make sure that we go out there and we reach these people with the relevant messages. Because I think another issue with like the idea of an audience is oftentimes it's not because you have great engagement rates or people liking, listening, downloads, whatever, that they will buy your product. I mean, even if you remember high school, there if the class was listening to your story, that doesn't mean that they would pick it up later and do something with it. So again, the idea of an audience is great, but I know a lot of brands personally that I follow on social media that I really love, but I don't buy from them. So I don't know if that's a good for the idea for them to actually invest in. And so think about that when you're doing this. Like, first try to reach people that will actually buy, because it's the company or your company or your clients, doesn't matter. It's their bottom line. I mean, it's their revenue. It's why they hired you. They didn't hire you to be an entertainer in the first side. They hired you to generate probably more sales or attract new people. So think about it. And that's why, again, audience sometimes isn't a good word. Of course, when you're watching, for example, when you're watching this video or when you're listening to my podcast, you're my audience. And I think it's great to think about that in terms of respecting your audience and giving them what they want and all that stuff. So it's not a bad word. It's just sometimes a bad word in some contexts. So we need to like make sure that we understand the different levels of targeting, because targeting, it leads to a lot of discussions, and there's a lot of these cliches out there that say like target everyone, reach no one, you know, the typical idea of like you need to find your core tribe, core audience. And then there's discussions with clients that tell you, well sure, but I don't want to like limit this too much to a certain type of people because I won't attract the other people. I think that's where actually a lot of these discussions are just like getting it wrong in terms of like understanding why we are doing this exercise. So first you have the target market, which is actually everyone that you can reach in this category, everyone that will potentially buy this category. Let's say it's cars, then you have like everyone that's potentially buying a car is in your target market. So this is really big. And I think you need to start there, because there are limitations on every category. Let's say cars, there's limitations. You need a driver's license, so there's a minimum age, and then there's probably also some maximum age where you need to keep into account. And maybe you can look at some data as to how people are buying in this category and see what type of people generally are buying. So target market is the important one. And then there is the target customer, which is like the person that is most likely to buy your brand within that category. And like finding out who that is, we'll look into that a little bit later in this video. But that's of course really important, because it might be a smaller portion of this huge target market because of your company's strengths or positioning or whatever. It might be something that makes you more attractive or more likely to attract a certain type of customer. So that's your target customer. And then there's, of course, the perceptual target, which is, I think, something a lot of people in branding actually, where a lot of the confusion come from. Most of the time, we're talking about perceptual targets. When we're talking about core tribes, personas, all of these things, these are mostly perceptual targets. And I got this word from Mark Pollard, who's a really interesting brand strategist. So go look him up, or the Sweatheads group. I'll put the link in the description. So the idea of a perceptual target isn't that you're trying to like define everyone that's potentially going to buy your brand. You're actually trying to bring this customer to life by actually creating a persona or a couple of personas that are more specific and that can spark ideas, that can really lead to creative execution. So a perceptual target can be a lot more like creative and a lot more in depth than the other ones, the other levels we've seen. And I think that's where, if you can do this exercise and you can also like frame it that way with your client, that he understands, okay, we're actually doing a creative exercise here, trying to like make this a human thing so that it will inspire creativity, but it's not per se gonna limit our brand to this specific target. So again, like when you're working on this, make sure you frame it correctly. But of course, we need to realistically define these targets based on things, or we can just like throw a dart, which often happens actually. But I think it's important to look at a couple of factors when we are defining targets. And I think, of course, looking at historically at what the company has been doing so far, who has been buying this product, that's of course really important, because this is like the most validated you can get, because it's actually proven this is what's already working for them. So never underestimate the power of like previous purchases. I think a lot of times when we go into a brand strategy assignment, the idea is, okay, we're gonna attract a whole bunch of new customers and the old ones don't really matter. Well, that's not true. You always need to start with what already worked for the company and then try to see if there's other opportunities, or broaden that or deepen that in some way. Also, a huge thing here is understanding the category. So looking at the history of the company is important, but also looking at the category. What types of people are buying in this category? And more specifically, for example, like what are the expectations of the customer when they are buying, let's say, a car or something else? How do they perceive the category? I think that's really important. Understanding that broader market, those competitors around you, will make you define your target a lot more clearly. And then there's the business. Again, it's I said historically, which is like more what I meant is like what was already working in terms of like who was buying it. But business wise, there might be opportunities, or there might be some problems with the historical buyers. For example, maybe the people that were buying weren't the most profitable ones, or they weren't like recurring enough for this business model. So looking at the business opportunities and looking at like what is the most profitable customer is really important, because it will help us in like finding the right target customer, because there might be, in a big category, there might be certain opportunities that are more profitable than others. Let's say in cars, let's say your company is really good in, I don't know, providing service, like helping people. And let's say for within that category, for business users, this might be a really important proposition, while this is not important for just like non-professional car buyers. You might say, well, let's look at that segment as a really important, it might be a segment, or it might be like your whole target customers. We'll talk about segmentation later. And then of course, as a last like driver of defining your target is psychology, understanding the needs, the fears, the pains, the gains a lot of these exercises again lead to perceptual target definition, but they are hugely important. It's linked to the category research, where we try to understand like if people are thinking about buying cars, what are their expectations. But this can go a lot deeper into like just understanding the target customer. And often what happens is actually we do this the other way around, which is a problem, of course. We tend to create almost like a brand personality, and then we say, well, these type of young people will be attracted to that type of brand, so we need to speak to them. But we forget the fact that for example, these people never bought this brand historically, or they're not profitable. So let's say we want to, I hear this a lot, we want to attract more Gen Zers because, yeah, they're cool and we need a more fresh audience. And let's go on TikTok. Sure, but like, does the business support this? Like, is this a valid audience for our like for our business? And also just like avoid generational targeting in general. I think it's just like, it's not working really well because you can't define a generation that easily. Like, for example, I'm a millennial, you're a millennial, but we might like have a completely different frame of mind or expectations culturally or just personally. So I think that's just lazy actually. But let's talk about segmentation a little bit. Like, what is it? Why should we do it? Why shouldn't we do it? So segmentation, like my first advice would be just to avoid it in general. Like, if you can look for similarities instead of differences, I think you're always doing a better job of defining a brand that can work for multiple segments. So this is something that also, again, a lot of people don't like this because there's a lot of like branding books and philosophies that go like, you really need to understand that core tribe and make sure these messages are completely different than everyone else. And I think it's really sometimes a lot more about understanding the message that will speak to multiple segments. So looking at similarities is a big part of this. Let's say Coca-Cola is like, they have a message that will probably work for a lot of different peoples. Wow. Although they probably segment on certain things, like let's say certain generations or certain regions because of cultural traditions or different needs. So, but their overall brand message or their overall ID works for everyone. So first try and understand that, and then maybe level down and segment. So if we look at this pyramid, I think it's a great visualization of like how this segmentation mindset should work. Struggling with the words here. Is like we have the overarching narrative, which is like the brand ID, the brand platform, brand essence, whatever you want to call it. I mean, there's a lot of ways, but it's this ID that captures the brand. That is a message that you can bring. For example, for Let's Talk branding, that is solve bigger problems. That's my brand platform. That's what I think is like capturing Let's Talk branding as a whole. That's what I try to do, create courses, podcasts, bring in different perspectives so people can solve bigger problems. But then on a segmentation level, I might think, well, there's different types of people listening or watching. There's entrepreneurial types, there's young designers, there's marketers, and maybe these people have different types of needs. So I might create a course for, I don't know, marketing people or entrepreneurs. Or it might be a different approach. I might think like not in terms of like what their job types is, but in terms of like seniority. For example, I might have a courses for beginners, for intermediates, or for life. So you first need to understand like what are important segments and why, because oftentimes we're just segmenting for the sake of it. And again, like my first advice is to look for similarities. If I can create a course that works for all these segments, I mean, it costs me a lot less money, and I don't need to like create different landing pages and all that stuff to reach these different people. So if you can, that's powerful, that's strong. Don't be afraid to do that. But on some levels, you need segmentation. So think about that, and we'll dive into one type of segmentation that I usually do after this slide. But again, on the third level, we have these personalized touches, and I love that they use the word touches here, because I think oftentimes when it comes to personalization, we tend to almost personalize the brand. We tend to make like messages that are for specific people, I think that's where we go too far. Again, like you don't need a million versions of your brand. You just need to make sure that you can use some tools for personalization when, for example, they remove friction from the user experience. Then for example, personalization for me is a great tool. For example, I might visit a certain website, and because it knows my location, it can filter out certain stuff. I think that's just awesome. I mean, it removes friction, gets my job to be done, gets my job done quicker. So I think that's a great way. Where I don't like it is where there's a lot of brands that are trying to almost like make a one-on-one version of their brand for each person that visits their website based on a lot of data, tracking pixels, whatever. I think sometimes that goes too far. And I think if you can create a message that works for everyone, it's a lot more powerful. So just make sure that you segment at the right time when there are cultural differences, when the needs are really different, or when the mindsets are really different. So need-based segmenting is actually a great way to look at different segments within your target customer base. So what you actually do is you try to understand like what are the really different jobs to be done. So let's say we look at cars again. I think what might be a completely different need is, for example, I need a car for my business versus I need a car for my family to do private stuff, to travel, to just go around day by day. These are completely different types of needs. There are different contexts. And so understanding that need might make for an opportunity to create custom messages for that, or landing pages or ads that support that specific need. But what's different, like what's interesting to me here is you're looking at a need, so that one person can have different needs. For example, he might need a family car and he might need a business car. If you would be targeting based on demographic data such as gender or age, you might miss these things where we're not always one thing. We have different needs on different moments, different mindsets. So again, that's why need-based segments creates opportunities if you do this the right way. So I think that's where really you need to look at the category and understand what different types of people are, well, different types of needs. Again, you can see I fall in this trap myself a lot, but I've been doing it lately, and it really helps in understanding different categories and creating segments that are valuable. So I think the main takeaways is always look for similarities first. Like, what's the overarching brand narrative, as they call it? Look at like your segmentation pyramid, like understand first what that narrative is, and then look at if there are different, for example, need-based segments, and then you can work on that. And just think about your perceptual target versus everyone, because there's a big difference in what inspires creative and who to sell to. And finally, if you want to learn more about brand strategy, just check out, I've been creating this new online course. Just check out the link below and subscribe to get more news on when it's done. Thanks a lot. Take care, be safe, and I hope to see you soon.